Steve Hartman has traveled far and wide to tell the stories of people he met on the road. This time, he traveled to the Midwest to discover a past that hits close to home.
It was in this cellar that I found my roots.
That's the tin with all the film.
Davina Schumann, a relative I never met, graciously gave me this glimpse
Be my guest.
of the family I never knew I had. The Levies were a conservative Jewish family from Cleveland. Their patriarch, Harry Levy, the bald guy there, is my great-grandfather. And in the spring of 1930, one of his 4 daughters, we don't know which, gave birth out of wedlock to my mother. Davina, one of Harry's legitimate grandchildren, says no one ever knew about this baby.
It would be scandalous, really, in those days for this family.
My mom died knowing none of this. She was raised by another couple. No formal adoption, no paper trail. So if not for DNA testing, my ancestry would have remained a secret. A recent survey showed about a quarter of the people who take these tests find some kind of surprising result. Or in my case, 2 surprising results.
The test was more definitive regarding my grandfather, an Irish Catholic railroad worker named Frank Black.
I'm Steve.
This is his other daughter, Carol.
Oh, good.
My new aunt.
I see a little bit of my mother in you, actually.
Do you?
Yeah, I do.
And my new uncle,
Oh, this your brother?
also named
Oh my
Frank
gosh,
Black.
you don't seem 93.
Together, they told me all I needed to know about my grandpa.
How many wives?
5.
5 wives.
Right.
So this is not an A+ character.
So he might have D minus.
Are there any good characteristics?
In the 30s, he ran for office for councilman.
Only one?
He lost.
He was really a drinker. St. Patty's Day came.
I don't want to hear about St. Patty's Day.
He'd dress up, and we didn't see him for 3 days.
Not exactly the astronaut war hero I was hoping to find.
We were the apples that fell off the tree and rolled away.
It certainly does make you question who you are. I grew up an Eagle Scout who went to Catholic school. Now I find my grandpa was Casanova and the Levies were Jewish.
I'm Jewish now.
Yes, if your mother's Jewish, you are Jewish, no question.
I never knew that.
Mazel tov. But my new relatives all told me none of that matters.
I just want you to come for Thanksgiving.
My favorite nephew.
Look deep enough into your past,
Say that to all the nephews.
and odds are you'll find a family tree full of flowers and broken branches and a lot of leaves you don't recognize. But I think it's important to embrace it all, because whatever's there, it's exactly what your tree needed to grow the perfect you.
And Steve Hartman and on-the-road producer Roxanne Feitel are here with more. What a pleasure it is to have both of you here. Steve, what an incredible journey that you went on. I have to start at the beginning. What made you decide, first of all, to take this DNA test?
Well, I mentioned to Roxanne, just very briefly, that 40 years prior, my mom had a hard time getting a passport. And they told her that her birth certificate, there was something wrong with it. It was not accurate in some way. They still gave her the passport, and that was kind of that. My mom was always curious about it, even looked into it a little bit. And she asked a relative, shirt-tail relative, you know, might my parents not be my parents? And the relative told her, gave her one clue, said, we heard that your biological mother may be a Jewish woman from Cleveland. That's all we had. I mentioned it to Roxanne, who for some reason, I'm still not sure why, just sunk her teeth into this thing and spent about a year trying to find out who my relatives really were.
Wow.
And I took the test, and we found somebody who was a second cousin or something that I didn't recognize, and that's all she had to go on. Now, how she got from there to where we are now, she'll have to explain that.
All right, so yeah, Roxanne, then over to you. Okay. So how does that work? So you get these DNA test results back, and what does it exactly tell you? What clues did you have or not have to try to trace this?
So you get a list of people who you are related to with a certain amount of DNA, and Ancestry and 23andMe will predict, you know, this is your second cousin, or beyond. So you're looking for the closest matches, and then from there you're trying to build out a family tree. and see where there could possibly be overlap. Countries, they might be from, last names you might have in common, and look for that point of connection.
Do you have like a giant flow chart in your office trying to figure this out?
So many documents, you wouldn't believe.
And she is obsessing over this. When we have other stories to tell, we're on every week, and she keeps like looking into my family history. I say, I think you need to let this go. I think I told you that a time or two.
Yeah.
But secretly, she's still working on this. And it's not just like building out some random stranger's family tree to try to get to me. She also has to, because not everybody takes these tests, so she has to encourage other people that might be a relative to take the test.
So explain to me, how do you do that, Roxanne? I mean, I know producers perform miracles on a daily basis to try to make television happen, but you're on the phone with strangers, essentially, explaining this sort of backstory that may or may not have a direct connection to
And
that.
we need some of your DNA, by the way, which people are so willing to give up.
In this day and
It's
age.
true. I mean, my last job was as a booker, and I'm telling you that experience came in very handy, just being able to talk to people and make them feel comfortable. It took a lot of persistence getting on the phone with them multiple times, sending letters in the mail.
They must have been surprised, I would imagine.
Oh,
a lot
yeah.
of them.
A lot of them thought it was a scam.
Yeah.
They thought I was a scammer trying to get their personal information to steal their identity.
Davina, who you saw in the piece,
Yeah.
you sent her a FedEx letter and then sent her another follow-up letter. The FedEx letter came back to us saying, return to sender, But then for some reason she opened the actual letter we sent. She called her local police department. They told her it was a scam. Don't answer this.
Oh my gosh.
But eventually she took the test, and that's one of the steps that got us to figure out that one of those 4 women is my grandmother. We don't know which.
So, Steve, take us to the moment when you found out definitively, right, that there was a much deeper backstory to your family story than you had ever imagined.
It's very weird. I think Frank Black, somebody sent me a picture saying this is your grandfather. It's so weird. You stare at that picture for the longest time going, who is this guy? Do I look like him? I want to know more and more and more. It shocks you a little bit because I grew up thinking somebody else was my grandfather. Right. So you're relearning, but I was open to it. I found it all exciting. I know some people don't want to take these tests because they don't want to open a can of worms. A can of worms is a can of worms. It's as good as any can of beans.
I imagine, one of the things that makes you such a great reporter is we can see clearly in your stories your ability to sort of empathize and imagine what it must be like to be that person. I see that in your stories constantly. In this case, as you were learning about your relatives, is that something that kind of you experienced in a whole new way?
I think I embraced it, if for no other reason that it made me even more of a mutt than I thought I was before.
Yeah.
Which, getting back to my job and what I do, travel in the country, telling people stories, I think that's a good quality to have. I think to be, as all-encompassing a human being as you can possibly be. For any reporter, I think that's a good thing. So now I'm Jewish too. That's great. That's the more the merrier.
And I have to ask about your mother. How do you think she would have taken this news?
She would have loved it. She was very curious about this. There was no such thing as DNA testing back then. And to meet her half-sister Carol, they'd be fast friends. She'd be there right now.
And for people who are maybe thinking of going on their own sort of journey of discovery, what would you say to them? Because it can be a very difficult thing for some families to come to grips with the reality of their own stories.
Yeah, because I think we want a little fairy tale of where we came from. Like I joked in there about wanting to find an astronaut or a war hero.
Right.
But the truth is, I didn't care what I found. I just wanted to know the answers. And if you have that attitude, I think it's a great journey to go on.
All right, Steve Hartman and Roxanne Feitel, such a pleasure to have you both here. Thank you both very much.
Thanks.